Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of Filmography Club. I'm Jason Caviness. Today on the show, I welcome Becky Delius as we discuss Paul Thomas Anderson's sixth film, the post-World War II psychological drama, The Master. Released in 2012, it challenged and confounded many in the audience, myself included. It wasn't until a second viewing when I realized what a breathtakingly beautiful film that it is. And so it goes with many of PTA's films, and not in a Fight Club or Sixth Sense sort of way, where a twist in the third act reveals a formerly hidden truth that changes the context of earlier scenes altogether. I simply needed more time to hang out with these characters and to debate with other viewers just what PTA was getting at, if anything at all. Anderson's trademarks are at full stretch in this film. The use of the oneer, the perfect instinct for casting, Oscar-worthy performances, and an unflinching, impartial eye in which the movie never explicitly tells you how you should feel about the characters. It simply observes and allows the viewer to decide for him or herself. Admittedly, I was puzzled after my first viewing, but now, having seen it a handful of times, I can say that I consider this to be among PTA's finer works, a movie that gets better with each viewing. I was happy to have Becky Delius in the studio with me. She and I go way back, and as you're about to hear, she's clever, erudite, and very charming. So without further ado, I bring you our talk about The Master.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, thanks for coming. I'm very happy to have you here.
You know, I kind of said this before we sat down to do this, but listening back to the other episodes, you have these guests that are very knowledgeable, and they work in film and they understand film, and Will Fox knows a bunch of French words, and I don't really know any of that stuff. So I was a little why did he ask me to do this? Yeah. So there's a little bit of imposter syndrome right now. So just be easy on me, because I have plenty of opinions, but I don't have all the technical mojo mumbo jumbo.
That's okay. You're in the room, Becky, because you're funny and you're smart. Okay. And you're good at backing up your opinions, not because you're some kind of a cinephile.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. So that's where we're at.
All right.
Full disclosure, Becky and I go way back, 16, 17 years? Something like that. We're old friends.
Yes.
And so I'm glad to have you here. This will be more like a hangout.
I'm super excited.
Yeah. So we're talking about The Master today. It's episode 6 of season 1, Paul Thomas Anderson's sixth film, the 2012 psychological drama, I guess, character study.
I think that's right.
This is a weird one. Like most of his movies, say 3 out of 8 I got and liked immediately. Mm-hmm. The other 5, and this is one of them, I walked out of the theater baffled, knowing full well that the shortcoming is on my fault. The failure to connect is on me.
So this is not for everyone.
No.
And I think that for me, though, I sat in the theater and I watched it and I was like, oh, fuck yes, and my eyes were big, and it was he gets it. He totally gets it, thinking about PTA. But it's funny because I rewatched the movie last night, and I watched it with Ryan Briegel, who hosts My Fantasy Funeral, and he had never seen it, and he was just like, yeah, I don't know.
That's how I felt. That's how I felt. I remember distinctly turning to Will Fox after walking out of that theater and I don't know about that one.
Right.
And I think the reason why is because no one has an arc in this movie.
Right.
Everyone ends up exactly the same person at the end of the movie as they are at the beginning.
Yes.
Because no one learns anything.
Yes, because Jason, The Master is about the futility of being a human being. And that is what I love about it.
Sure.
Is that this is such a nihilist exploration. And I thrive on that, to be honest. Maybe it's my Germanic roots that I'm nothing matters, kind of thing. But it brings me great comfort.
Yeah, I like Cormac McCarthy myself. I'm a fan of nihilism in fiction. So I see where you're coming from.
But truly, I think The Master is about futility. And I think that it's about this, this task, right? This, Sisyphus rolling the ball, of your own trauma and baggage up a hill forever. Sometimes you make it all the way to the top, but always eventually, it's going to roll back down and crush you under your own weight. And I think that you see that in the movie. And I think also, The Master, more so because PTA really relies on ensemble casts a lot. And so I think that this movie was unusual for a lot of people who were expecting this his sort of usual like merry band of pranksters on screen. And really what you have is Phillip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix locked in a cage for 2+ hours. And that is, and again, Joaquin Phoenix isn't for everyone. I think most people generally kind of love Phillip Seymour Hoffman, but there's so much Joaquin in it, and not just Joaquin, but Joaquin in like such an altered state, such an animalistic altered state where he's barely articulate. Both of his eyes aren't even usually open at the same time. He's hunched over. I think it's really difficult to watch and it's difficult to digest. But I think that's, I love kind of seeing that like play out on the screen. I love seeing those. And Joaquin Phoenix, however you feel about him, he's a great actor. Like he's a really good actor. And I say that as somebody who studied theater and who, he really like he embodies it. I mean, almost to a painful degree. I mean, watching him stoop over in that movie a lot, I think is hard to watch, the physicality of it. And I think it's supposed to be hard to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. And from just doing basic research on this thing, apparently he really does have some sort of a messed up shoulder.
Right.
And he just kind of leaned into it, and he never really talked to Paul Thomas Anderson about the choice that he was going to make to do that. But PTA just saw it happening that first day, and he was like, okay, I'm just not even going to say anything. I don't want to break the spell, but I like what he's doing there.
Yeah.
And I thought it worked. He's a fantastic actor. And you can't talk about a Paul Thomas Anderson movie really without talking about a oneer, that really long take. Usually they're technical. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of actors trying to hit cues. In this one, it's just that processing scene where he tells him not to blink, and the camera just stays on him for the longest time without cutting away, and the range of emotion that he goes through during that processing, what Scientologists call auditing. In this film, it's called processing.
Yeah.
I guess we should back up just a moment and talk about just the broad overview of the movie. We're again, like I mentioned before we went on, we're not going to go through this movie beat by beat. That's boring. But okay, most of the film takes place in 1950.
That's right. Yep.
Post-war. Our hero, or at least our lead, our protagonist, not the titular guy, by the way. The titular master is got second billing on this movie, Phillip Seymour Hoffman's character, Lancaster Dodd. But Joaquin Phoenix's character is a guy named Freddie Quell. He was a seaman in World War II, and he suffers from what we now know to be post-traumatic stress disorder. Shell-shocked, I believe they called it, even back when I was a little kid. But
with a healthy dose of, childhood trauma and
sexual dysfunction.
Right, and substance and alcohol abuse.
Yeah, he's an alcoholic, and he's got very deep-seated sexual issues, which we will definitely get into in a little bit. Really, he just falls in with this, I want to avoid using the C word, but I mean, cult is really what it is at its basis. It's what the actors all thought of it as a movement, because really it's kind of how a movement becomes a cult in a way. The movie's not even about that. The way Boogie Nights is not about porn. It's just kind of the setting.
Right.
This movie's not really about the cult, but it is the setting for it. Most of the characters in it are members.
Right. And I think that what is interesting is that they do set it, in 1950, and that's the same year that the Dianetics book was written, and that the movement sort of started. And it's interesting because in interviews, Phillip Seymour Hoffman kept saying, this isn't a movie about Scientology. It's really not. This is a movie. And I kind of was like, but I think he's right. This movie is about people looking for something beyond themselves. And that's not unusual. I mean, that's really like the whole reason organized religion exists. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's not crazy. But I think you're right. Like, it creates a convenient cradle, I think, for this whole sort of interchange between the two characters to play out. But it's not really about that. It just creates sort of an interesting backdrop. So, yeah, another thing that I think... I'll let you go ahead and continue if you want to continue the overview. Yeah, so talking about him coming back from the war, and it struck me like... One of the first scenes that we see, after he is sort of like debriefed, they're like, here's all the things that you can do in your new life as a civilian, and he's working in this fancy department store, which I want to say, I'm really sad that department stores are not that fancy anymore. I was a little bummed out about that.
Yeah, they don't have sales girls walking around.
Yes.
Showing off them.
Yes.
$49.99.
I loved it. What a deal. So anyway, But, he's there and he gets this job as like a photographer, right? Like taking family portraits, essentially.
I love that sequence with all the pictures. It looks exactly like stuff that hung up on Grandpa's wall back in the day.
Absolutely. And so it's kind of like he's taking pictures of other people's families. He takes a picture of this man that he ends up having this altercation with who, he says, is this for your wife? And it kind of like triggers something in him when he says yes. And it's like, when Freddie comes back from, the idea that it's the ultimate rubbing of his nose and the fact that he is a man without a family, a man without a love, a man who really has no good memories aside from the ones of Doris, his kind of long lost love, which also pain him immensely. And here his first job out of the war is to help others capture memories to give to the people in their life that he doesn't have. And so that I thought was just like the greatest irony, it's like, great, I get to look at happy families and happy couples all day
set him
long,
off, and he deliberately fought that. He started that fight.
Yes, he did.
Freddie's kind of an asshole.
He is.
He's very much an asshole.
Absolutely.
He's fun to watch. He's a scoundrel.
I mean, I wouldn't even... it's funny because a scoundrel to me suggests that there's some intelligence behind your actions. No. And I think he is just like... He's all like id, right?
I was about to say that he's walking id.
Yeah, he's just an erect penis walking around getting into fights, and that's kind of it. And of course, when he first comes upon the Alethea and Lancaster Dodd is there, and he kind of stows away on the ship, and when he the next day is walking around and he happens upon those group of people that were they were listening to the tape, of Dodd, and he's talking about, you're not an animal, and as he's listening, he scrawls out like, do you want to fuck on a piece of paper and gives it to the woman sitting across the table. So it's like not really soaking in for him. Like he's not like a sophisticated mind, know.
And even later on in the film, when he's been with the group for a good long while, he's still not taking it in. He still just immediately resorts to violence when challenged in any way.
Absolutely. And something too I kind of wanted to touch on when you were talking about his shoulder is that pose also that he has with his arms out a lot, bent over with like his hands on his back, where his kidneys would be, right? My aunt's second husband, who I have a few like very foggy memories of, he was also like an intense alcoholic, and in pictures that I've seen of him, he had that stance, that sort of, and he was sort of the same wiry build, and so kind of stooped over with like his hands out on his hips, on his back. So I just, seeing that in the movie, kind of connected back to just really feeling like Joaquin Phoenix really made some choices as an actor there that really served him well in terms of, you can give a person period clothes, you can style their hair, you can do all of these things, but it's another thing to really change the way that you carry yourself to how someone would have carried themselves in a different time. And I think that's, I don't know, I just think that was really intelligent on his part to do that.
Yeah, he's a fantastic talent.
This your ship?
I'm its commander, yes.
Where's it going?
New York City through the canal. You're a seaman.
Yeah, how'd I get down here?
You're acting aggressive because you drank too much alcohol.
No, I don't think so.
You told me you were an able-bodied seaman and you were looking for work.
I told you? Yeah, will you have any?
Why all the skulking and sneaking? Work cannot be that difficult to come by.
Well, it depends on when you're ready to go.
You shouldn't work in your condition.
No, I can work.
You're aberrated.
No, I'm not.
You know what that means?
No.
You've wandered from the proper path, haven't you? These problems you have?
I don't have any problems. I don't know what I told you, but if you have work for me to do, I can do it.
You seem so familiar to me.
Yeah. What do you do?
I do many, many things. I am a writer, a doctor, a nuclear physicist, a theoretical philosopher. But above all, I am a man. Hopelessly inquisitive man, just like you.
Well, I'm sorry if I got out of hand last night. It's cold and those hungry.
Don't apologize. You're a scoundrel. And as a scientist and a connoisseur, I have no idea the contents of this remarkable potion. What's in it?
Secrets.
Paul Thomas Anderson's reoccurring themes are on full display in this movie. The whole making a surrogate family for oneself.
Right.
The whole father-son dynamic,
Yes.
which is very much on display here. It's almost like we're tempted to say master-apprentice, but it's more master and pet in a way.
Right.
I mean, Joaquin is almost his dog in a way. The way he commands him around. The scene at the beginning, when they're on the boat, it's the wedding, and he stands up, and he is so charismatic as Lancaster Dodd. And he tells the story with the dragon. The dragon is Joaquin. The dragon is Freddie Quell. When he talks about, here comes this dragon, and it's out of control, and it's got blood dripping from its fangs, and I have a lasso, and I wrap it around, and now it's on a leash.
Right.
And now I can take it for a walk, and all that stuff. And the camera keeps cutting back to Freddie, and he's not getting it, but he's got this need to dominate, and Freddie has this need to be dominated. He is very much a submissive. He needs to be told what to do.
Right.
That whole scene was just metaphor.
Yeah, and I think also when he does the first processing with Freddie, and it was very brief, and then he says, okay, that's enough for today. And he's like, no, keep going. You know, it struck me that, like, this is a person who probably didn't have a father ever really ask him any questions about himself. And even though these questions are kind of perverse and strange, you know, do you linger at bus stations for pleasure, whatever, like the idea that someone is taking interest in him, the idea that someone cares about his experiences or cares about what he thinks. And also I think that, I think you're right. Like he is and I'll kind of talk about this later as we sort of move through the movie, but I think when he sees Freddie, he's like, this is the perfect guinea pig for this, because I'm not sold that Dodd believes in the process. I think he believes that he can make other people believe in the process. When he sees Freddie, I think he thinks, like, here is this just like ball of clay. Like, here is the perfect test tube. Here is the perfect guinea pig that if it works, I'm going to be able to figure it out because I can fix him, right? Like, he's the perfect person to experiment on. And so I think Freddie being around really excites him because he's the perfect person to try out, you know, all of this stuff on.
Yeah, the whole back and forth, the wall, window, just back and forth. Again, it's like a pet on command. Just go do the thing, now do that, now do it again.
And you do get the sense during that scene that he probably had never done that with a person before, because I don't know that he would have found someone willing to do it for that long and to that extent.
Probably not, yeah. Freddie was all in.
He was all in. He was definitely all in.
Yeah, the window thing, back to the pet thing. I mean, it's just weird. Someone pointed it out to me, and I just couldn't unsee it when I was watching it this time. Even the scene where Freddie gets out of jail, and they're back at that house in Philadelphia, and he greets him with open arms. Like they had the big blow up.
Yeah.
They get down on the ground and start wrestling like I do with my bull mastiff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the whole, when he digs up his life's work and they're walking away and he just tells Freddie, stop.
Right. Yeah.
And then he just waits and looks around. He's like, okay, now let's go.
But you know, if you think about it, like a lot of people that came out of the service during that time, people that come out of the service in the military now, I think it's hard to adjust sometimes to civilian life because you have such this rigorous sense of discipline and order, and there's always a commander. There's always somebody above you telling you what time to get up in the morning, what time to go to sleep at night, like what you're doing this hour, this hour, this hour. And I think that a lot of, and also people that are in prison, right? Like it's hard for them sometimes to adjust on the outside because you're constantly being told what to do. And while that can be frustrating, I think at first, eventually you get used to it and you start to rely on it as a way to sort of conduct your life. And I think that it's right that Freddie needs Lancaster as much as Lancaster needs Freddie.
Absolutely. It's sort of a love story, too. The music, this is Johnny Greenwood's second film with him, and his score is very sweeping. It's very period specific. It sounds like something that was recorded back in 1950.
Yeah.
And it's very sappy, lots of sweeping strings and stuff. It sounds like romance music. And hell, at the very end, Lancaster serenades Freddie explicitly.
Yeah. Do you know about that song? Do you know the history of that song?
I don't know about the history of that song, but I'm definitely going to get into the music in a little bit. But go ahead. What do you...
Yeah, he sings this song called I'd Like to Get You on a Slow Boat to China. And that was written in 1948. And so it kind of became this very classic pop standard. And every crooner from then until even now has recorded that song. But the guy who wrote it, his name was Frank Loesser, and his daughter wrote a biography about him in the 90s. And she said that, this isn't a quote, "I'd like to get you on a slow boat to China" was a well-known phrase among poker players, referring to a person who lost steadily and handsomely. My father turned it into a romantic song, placing the title in the mainstream of catchphrases, the idea being that a slow boat to China was the longest trip one could imagine. And I think that's it, because on both levels of the meaning, Quell is a constant source of inspiration, testing, experimentation for all of Dodd's gambles about the process and his theories. You know, he may not even believe them himself, but he's willing to find out if they're worth belief. And I think that Quell is the perfect person for this, because proven time and time again, he's not capable of moving past those animal behavior and instincts. 2 steps forward, he's always going to take 3 steps back. But also, I think the metaphor being a very long trip, it's the one that Dodd thinks anyone who goes under the process will be on, right? Like a trip without end. And I think when he sings that to him in this really moving moment, and, you know, Freddie's sitting there almost with this, like, beatific look of ecstasy on his face,
he loves
right? He loves it.
He's needed.
He
knows it.
You know, his eyes are the fullest that we see them, the most open that we see them. But unfortunately, at this time, they're the milky, clouded eyes of somebody who is probably dying, right? Like, he's probably got, like, kidney failure at this point. You know, I mean, this
he's
is
been
not,
drinking that potion for a long time.
He's been drinking, like, jet fuel and paint thinner for 20 years or whatever, you know. So he's not, like, the healthiest dude around. But he's sitting there, and he's in ecstasy hearing this. And I think for Dodd, he's like, stay with me, because you're the only person that I'm ever gonna fully get to sort of explore my theories on, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, it's a little twisted from him, but, you know, I think there is an admiration from Dodd as well. Yeah, that's a really heavy scene.
Dodd likes him. Dodd likes the guy a lot. It's genuine, and you can tell. I don't think that he's bullshitting. He bullshits a lot in the movie. And when you say that he's not truly a believer, maybe. The movie doesn't ever explicitly make that. The one moment I thought might have been a tell was when Laura Dern's character sits down and says, hey, on page 13, I noticed a change, whereas before, when the first book says that we're supposed to recall our past lives, here you say try to imagine. You replace the word recall with imagine.
Right.
And really, I think that comes down to, no, I want to make it as broad as possible so that I can rake in more money.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And he pitches a fit. He's very calm, except for a few scenes in the movie.
Right.
He's a hypocrite.
When he's being questioned,
he acts like
can't
he's
handle it.
Ubermensch. He acts like he's the thinking man, the dignified man at the top of the animal kingdom, sitting perched above it, looking down on it. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody like Quill, who just, if he can't drink it or fuck it, he has no use for it.
Right.
And but he pitches a fit when the guy challenges him on his beliefs during the processing scene, when he calls him a pig fuck.
Yeah.
That was just unnerving.
Who is that guy, by the way?
He's a great actor, and it strikes me, it's really sad.
I know
Both of those actors in that scene are passed away now. He was in the first season. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. You know what? I've got it
because
right.
I was like, when I saw him, I was like, I know that guy. Who is that guy?
He was in season 1 of Silicon Valley on HBO.
That's right.
And then he passed away.
He was the, like, sort of, he was like the tech CEO guy.
The weirdo.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's right.
And then he died in real life, so they replaced his character with just the female version of exactly him.
Totally.
Yeah. He played a character named John Moore.
Oh, man. I was trying to remember.
I've enjoyed the 2 things I've seen him in anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lancaster just flips his shit when anyone challenges him remotely. He's just not used to it.
Right.
And to be fair, it's almost like going to someone's church and just in the middle of a sermon raising your hand and saying, hey, wait a minute, how were the stars made after the plants?
Yeah.
Have you not heard of photosynthesis?
Yeah, what I love in that scene is like, excuse me.
And they're trying to ignore him.
Like that it's so perfect, you know what I mean? Because you builds that tension where you're like, okay, what's gonna happen here? Is it just gonna go on forever? They're gonna like
so
it's some
tense.
it's so tense. At some point, he's gonna respond to it. But I think that Phillip Seymour Hoffman said over and over again, I'm not playing L. Ron Hubbard. I'm not playing L. Ron Hubbard, and I think that's right, because if you've ever watched any old video of L. Ron Hubbard, he is nowhere near as charismatic as Lancaster Dodd is.
Not at all.
Like at all.
Yeah, and you could easily do it's a very pat impression that you could do of L. Ron Hubbard. The way he speaks, the way he carries himself, it's very specific.
Right.
And that is not what Phil Seymour Hoffman is doing at all.
Physically, they do look similarly, but the personality is very, very different. But there are ribbons of sort of, I think, building up to the seeds of Scientology in this movie, right? Like, for instance, after the scene that you're talking about in the New York penthouse, right, where that guy comes in and he's like, excuse me, like, this is all bullshit. And Phillip Seymour Hoffman calls him a pig fuck, not a pig fucker, a pig fuck. Right. I'm like, was that improvised? Because that was brilliant. Yeah. But later that night, when his wife Peggy, played by Amy Adams, was saying, enough of this. Like, why are we defending our beliefs to these people? We should be on the attack. We should be on the offense. And that's really now how Scientology operates. Yeah.
The fair game doctrine, I believe it's called.
Yes.
That it was public. They admitted it in public. You could go and look at their books, and it explicitly said that until I think the late 60s. And they eventually... They say that they rescinded that, but come on.
Right.
Allegedly, by the way, they're very litigious. So this is all allegedly. If I say anything that might look bad on the Church of Scientology, it's all allegedly.
Right. So, but I think that is kind of, and also going back to one of the final scenes where Dodd is talking to Freddie and they're in England, and Peggy, who doesn't like Freddie, right? Like, she's not his biggest fan. And she says, this is something you either do for a billion years or not at all.
That's straight out of Scientology.
And that's straight out of the billion-year contract, right? The Sea Org members.
Their slave labor force.
Right.
Allegedly.
Right.
You sign a billion-year contract with these folks.
Yeah. And I was kind of, and I knew that, so I knew about the billion-year contract, and then I was sort of like, but where does that come from? And I was like doing a little reading online, and so I found this information that, the Sea Org is kind of loosely based around like a naval,
it's all
thing.
Trying to pretend to be very official,
very like official,
endorsed,
right? And so there's a theory, I guess, from somebody who studies religion and modern religions and things, that the Sea Org is actually modeled after loyal officers who were part of the Galactic Confederacy who overthrew the intergalactic tyrant Xenu, which is canon.
Trillions of years
clearly,
ago.
know? Yeah. So I just think that's so fascinating. Ryan asked a question last night, which I didn't actually know the question to, which is that there's been a lot of like expose around Scientology in the last like 10 years or so, and especially around the Sea Org and some of the conditions that people allegedly say that they lived in or were forced to live in. I wonder if that even really exists anymore.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Allegedly. Because the guy that runs Scientology now, the new L. Ron Hubbard, David Miscavige,
yeah.
His wife hasn't been seen in public in years.
That's right. So, and then I had heard that as well.
That's why Leah Remini is no longer in the church, because she dared ask, hey, where's Susan, or whatever her name is.
Yeah. And she hasn't been found?
I don't know. There's plenty of, if you guys want to look into it, there's plenty of stuff out there on it now, but I don't know the answer to that question.
So not to get too off in the weeds with Scientology, because again, I don't want that to overshadow like what this movie is about, because again, just like Boogie Nights isn't about porn, this isn't really about Scientology. I think it's just about a person in a position of authority, and whether that authority is real or given to somebody about them and how they use that authority, and also about a desperately broken human being. And I think really the essential theme, which I kind of touched on, of futility, but also like, is progress possible? Is it possible to change? Does anybody ever really change?
Right. Yeah, it's like we touched on at the beginning. Everyone's pretty much in the same spot they're in at the end, at the beginning as they are at the end, with the exception, Freddie does have one pretty significant change. He's no longer chasing Doris at the end.
Right.
Once he goes to her mother's house and he finds out
she's truly gone,
that she's truly gone, and there is no going back, then he goes off to England to see if there's a chance.
Can we talk about there's this definite shift in the movie where up and from the beginning until about a third of the way through, it feels very linear. It feels like you understand the story that is being laid out before you. Everything feels believable-ish, right? Everything makes sense. And then things start to get a little surreal. And so there's that scene where they're at the house, Laura Dern's home, and
a roving,
and then the scene shifts, and then the women are nude. And it occurred to me last night, I think when I first watched it back when the movie came out, that I assumed they were actually nude. And then on a second viewing, or I guess it's my third viewing, I was like, I don't think they are actually nude.
I had the same epiphany today. At first I thought they were just saying something about patriarchy and religion.
Right.
That's what I thought it was. But it's the same song, and the women haven't had time to remove their clothing, and there's no clothing lying about anywhere.
Right.
That's Freddie Quell. That's him imagining the women naked because he's sexually depraved.
Yes. So that's exactly what I took from it. And so that was something that I really was like, oh, no. Also, I just want to talk about the merkins that all those women were wearing that were like, those were like carpets. Like those are straight up toupees. I want to say that might have been like a late edition. I haven't read the script, but I'm wondering if PTA was just like, I don't know, I got a crazy idea. And they're like, how many merkins can we scare up? You know, like whatever. And they're like, well, we can't find any merkins, but we found these men's toupees, and they're like cutting them into V's or whatever. Because that was like some thick bush. Like it doesn't grow like that, guys. Like, I'm sorry, you know what I mean? It's just like
a guy directed that. Yeah,
it was unreal.
This is what it would look like in 1950.
It was unreal. It was crazy. It was literally insane. But yeah, so there's that. But then also, you know, he's in the movie theater, and you know, it comes out with a phone, and it's Lancaster, and he's like,
he's found him.
And how somehow, and it's almost like, is this happening? And so there was a part of me watching it that's like, have we sort of entered into Freddie's insanity, and like, are we kind of stuck in this place where we don't really know what's reality? We don't really know, did he go to England? How the fuck did he get to England? Like, this guy doesn't have any money. He doesn't have any resources, you know, like, the Lancaster paper. I want that information. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because it didn't bother me until Ryan started asking questions about it.
See,
you know,
questions like that don't bother me at all. That's fine. The fact is, he got there.
He did get there. So not so much how did he get to England. I'm like, okay, I can. Okay, you know, back then, you could like stow away on a ship or something and get there in a few weeks.
And we know Freddie's
willing to do that, but the finding him in the movie theater thing was super bizarre. You know, he's in this movie theater by himself. He's sleeping. Like a waiter comes out with like a phone on a silver tray or what. You know, it's like, also there weren't cordless phones back then, right? Like how long is that telephone cord?
Yeah, it was weird. I'm not sure. I don't know if Lancaster found him. And if so, how? I have no idea.
Because it's almost like when in that same sort of, if you are wondering about that, when he gets to Lancaster in England, they don't have this. It's not as if Lancaster's like, thank you for coming. He's like, you know, it's almost like, oh, you're here. If you don't stick it out this time, I'm never going to see you again. You know, like
right.
it struck me as if Freddie had just shown up without any invitation, which makes me wonder if he was actually invited.
Right. When he gets to the front, the receptionist lady asks if he's, you know, I'm here to see the master. Right. Is he expecting you? And he said he should be, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe. I can't remember exactly the word.
Yeah. So there were questions about that.
So I want to talk about the music in this movie.
Okay,
and I don't mean the Johnny Greenwood score, which is pitch perfect. It's fine. It's great. But I think the key to understanding Freddie's story in this film, it's explicitly told through the music. Paul Thomas Anderson, I didn't realize it until I started this podcast, that his musical cues are so on the nose. He doesn't use obvious musical cues necessarily, but if you pay attention to the lyrics in a particular song, it's laying out what that scene's about. In this movie, it's to a T. So at the beginning, we've got Doris, who is Freddie Quell's, the girl he's kind of chasing after this entire movie, his long-lost love. When they're separating, one of them's about to go away, she sings Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with anyone else but me, and it's a song about fidelity when one of them's about to leave.
I wrote my mother, I wrote my father, and now I'm writing you too. I'm sure of mother, I'm sure of father. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. With anyone else but me. With anyone else but me. No, 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 don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me.
And he sticks to that. It cuts to him with the department store job when he starts the fight with the guy. And as the sales girl is walking around showing off the mink coat for $49.99, actually kind of selling her body in a weird way.
Right.
The song Get Thee Behind Me, Satan.
Yeah.
It's a song about putting temptation behind you.
Right.
And then they go and they make out for a little bit, and he's clearly a horny guy and he wants to have sex with her. He asks her out that night, but then it cuts to him passed out at dinner with her. And I think that he did that probably on purpose in order to stay true.
Do you think so?
I do.
I don't know.
I think maybe I'm reading too much into the musical cues here, but
I don't think that he is that disciplined. I mean, this is a person who all evidence tells us that this is this person has zero self-control. And I think that I just don't see him, I think if he could have had sex with that woman, he would have. I mean, if we're thinking about even when he's on the ship and he asks that woman if she wants to fuck, he's seeking it out.
Sure.
You know?
But he never well, we'll get to this. Let's put a pin in that because I'm going to come back around to that. All right. So the next song that's sung in the movie is the scene that we just talked about with the nude women. It's Lancaster singing So We'll Go No More A-Roving, which is...
Is that an old English? Is that from Canterbury Tales or something?
It certainly sounds like it. But I believe it's Lancaster kind of in a way singing that to Freddie. It's basically him saying, hey, you found me, I found you, we don't need anyone else. That's what that feels like to me. And then when it cuts to Freddie, he's imagining these women naked. So he's on a totally different page.
Right.
I think that was meant to show where they're at in their thinking. Where Lancaster's like, this is good. We've got this thing going. Let's keep it this way. And then we see it through Freddie's eyes, and he's just picturing these women nude.
So I just looked up this roving song.
Okay.
And this was a poem written in 1817. And according to this author, it describes the fatigue of age conquering the restlessness of youth. So that's very on brand for the two of them.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get the motorcycle scene where Freddie fucks off. He steals the motorcycle, but what he's doing, he's going back to Doris.
Yes, he is going back to Doris.
He's thought about it long and hard, and as he's driving away, we get a song called No Other Love, and it's a song about devotion to one particular person.
Right.
And I think that it works on two levels here. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it's Freddie to Doris.
Isn't that the point of the podcast, is read too much into these movies?
Yeah, it kind of is.
Okay.
But it's Freddie to Doris, but it's also Lancaster to Freddie.
Oh, okay.
Because it keeps cutting back to those close-ups with Lancaster, and he's not happy at all. He's very concerned about Freddie driving off and just disappearing over the horizon with his motorcycle. So then, at the end of the film, we're back in, towards the end of the film, we're in England, and when Dodd serenades Freddie with Slow Boat to China, which has got lyrics in it that sort of evoke, I want to keep you to myself. I mean, I know that it meant the gambling thing, but here it's like, I want to keep you to myself.
Yeah.
Freddie is a sailor. He's born to just live free and to just go where the winds take him. So he decides, I want to stay. I'll stay here and take pictures for you. But the subtext there is, I don't buy any of this stuff, though.
Yeah. I think Freddie gives up, too. I think that at that point in the film, because I think physically he looks old, he looks sick, right? His skin is kind of hanging off of him in this scene. We get the sense that he has aged. And I think that Freddie gives up. And I think that the whole movie, he's sort of fighting against his intrinsic nature, which is to be better than what he is. And I think ultimately he resigns himself to the fact that he doesn't really have any interest in being any different than how he is, you know? And I think that the whole time Dodd wants him to sort of be more than an animal, wear a suit, be something he's not. And I think he's just as much as it hurts me, because I think he loves Dodd and he wants to be part of that family.
Absolutely.
He's just I can't do it. It's not going to work. And maybe that might be the most sophisticated kind of thought that he has, which is that instead of just instinctually doing it or impulsively doing it, he's kind of thinks one step ahead finally, and it's like, it's not going to work. You know, I'm never going to be that. I don't want to be that.
Well, that brings us to the very end of the movie, and the last musical cue we get as we go to credits, we get a flashback to Freddie from the beginning of the film when he's on the beach at Guam.
Yeah.
And he lies down next to the sand woman that they've made, and the song Changing Partners comes on. And that song is a waltz, and it's about waltzing and changing partners. But of course, there's also, it's just about never being satisfied with who you have, and about just splitting up and going your separate ways. And so at the very end, even though he did kind of get over Doris in a way, or at least he's no longer hanging his hat on that and seeing that as a goal that he has to work towards.
Yeah.
Oh, also, excuse me, let me back up before we get to that. Again, the only change Freddie goes through at the end, once he realizes he doesn't have Doris to chase after anymore, and things don't pan out at the cause with Lancaster, the first thing he does is he goes and gets laid.
Yeah.
For the first time in the whole movie.
He goes to a bar.
He goes to a pub.
And then a pub, which is a bar, parentheses. And then he goes and he finds a woman and has sex with her.
Yeah, he indulges that. And that's the only time he's done that in the movie.
Yeah.
He does. He's sexually depraved, but he's really sexually frustrated. He's really he's not getting any.
Right. I wouldn't want to have sex with him.
No.
He's like insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And his breath smells like ethanol and paint thinner.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, no way. If that dude came up to me, I'd be like, yeah, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm real good.
Holla elsewhere, Freddie.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I mean, all jokes aside, I think people, obviously you and other people, walk out of that movie thinking ugh, there's no resolution, I mean, really, there's no resolution. You just see, you sort of see the crash of these two machines, kind of, and then you just sort of see the aftermath of it, which PTA does a great job of. There's several shots of the wake of a ship going through the water.
Yeah, those little interstitials he does. Those are beautiful.
And those are really beautiful, but I think also to really drive home the metaphor of we're kind of all living our lives as these huge ships going through calm water, and then you look behind you. For most of us, there's some foam and waves.
There's turmoil.
Yeah, there's turmoil back there, I mean, there's stuff back there. And so you can either gaze at it and find beauty in it and find some meaning in it, or you just kind of keep drinking and fucking.
Yeah. Keep doing what created all that turmoil.
Yeah, exactly. Keep doing what created all that turmoil to begin with. And so, I don't know. I mean, I define the sort of nihilism in it really interesting, because I don't think a lot of filmmakers explore that, because most people don't want to see it. Most people want entertainment to be this distraction or this release, or they don't want to be reminded about the fact that most of our lives are pretty stagnant, and that we do engage in the same harmful, or at the very least the same stunting behaviors over and over again. Nobody wants to be reminded that. They don't want to pay the price of admission to go be reminded of that for 2.5 hours in big screen. And so
that's absolutely true, Becky. I can tell you, because when I got out of that theater, I saw it at the Green Hills movie theater.
Yes.
And we were going to the parking lot, and there was an elevator. So me and Will Fox got in that elevator, and on the ride down, we were in there with other people who were in the theater that had just seen this movie too.
Yeah.
And they hated it.
Yeah, of course.
They hated that movie. This movie lost money in the theaters.
Yeah.
It lost about $3-4 million, I believe.
I get it. But for me, and I say this not really as a joke, I have experienced a lot of personal trauma, a lot of familial trauma. So I understand that. And I think that what I find especially fascinating about the way that PTA used, again, sort of the backdrop of the origins of Dianetics movement, which became Scientology, but it could have been anything, right? It could have been more LDS, you know what I mean? It could have been Latter-day Saints. It could have been any sort of modern religious movement. The idea that when you feel like you are completely alone, and you feel like there's nothing to go back to, and you feel like you're just not really sure what to do, where to do it, how to do it. Somebody swoops in and they're like, this is the truth, and this is the path, and this is the way. And so how sort of comforting that can be for people who have experienced super intense trauma or super painful things. And so I do really appreciate when filmmakers, especially really good filmmakers, are willing to sort of go out on a limb and accept that, like, this may not be a blockbuster, this may not be the summer hit or whatever, but that this movie is going to be really important to a few people, you know?
It's not going to be Boogie Nights. It's not going to define a decade by any means in cinema.
Yeah.
But the people that do find this movie, that go back to it for a second time, Ryan, watch it again.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Like I touched on earlier, like 5 of his movies, I had to watch a second time. And usually that second time is when it all snaps into place for me. And I realize, oh, this is clearly a masterpiece. The Master's up there with, like, firmly in, like, my top shelf Paul Thomas Anderson films. It's Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood, in this movie, and they're all 3 neck and neck now. After watching it again, it's like, man, what a great movie.
I mean, I think he really, like, the treatment that he gave those 2 actors, I don't know that another director could have fostered that as well. I mean, I really feel like, because, you know, I was listening to this interview with Paul Thomas Anderson, and he talks about how he doesn't feel like his job, like his obligation to his actors, is not as a director, but as a writer. And so I appreciate that, again, as somebody who, you know, has acted along like a million years ago, but the idea that he's not micromanaging. He's like, you cast the right people and you cast them for these roles, and you trust that the words that you've given them, that's going to be enough.
Right.
And,
you did the creative heavy lifting
you know,
by yourself while chain smoking, staring at your word processor.
Right. And then you let them take it to the next level.
Sure.
And I think that, because I think what we saw were the most organic inventions of those 2 people, of Phillip Seymour. I mean, Phillip Seymour Hoffman, God, when he died, it was just, I think that was just like such a devastation for art, you know, because he was such a phenomenal actor. But seeing him in that role, and the way that he's able to, like, both contain himself but also make himself really large when he has to be, the charisma he sort of exudes. I mean, it's so dynamic. It's so dynamic. And I mean, you want to be around that guy, right? Like,
I want to hang out with him.
I want to hang out with Lancaster.
Just the way he talks to people, you know?
Right.
We fought against the day and we won.
Like,
it seems so profound.
Yes.
Everything out of his mouth.
He just seems like such an affable guy.
He seems like the kind of guy who could successfully start up a cult.
Right.
I want to follow that guy.
I want to follow. I want to be around him.
I want to drink that remarkable potion with him and smoke minty flavored cools with him.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I get that, you know. So yeah, I appreciate that Paul Thomas Anderson was willing to make a movie that not a lot of people really like, because I liked it. If you're listening, Paul Thomas Anderson, I really liked it.
Yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite movies of his, without a doubt.
I don't need a happy ending.
No,
you know?
No,
I don't. I really don't.
I don't. Like, I almost jumped up and cheered at the end of No Country for Old Men. It's like, yes. Yeah. Thank you for not. Yes, that's great.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't need it, you know, as long as, like, what I've seen has been cathartic. I think that's the word I'm probably looking for, is that it's a cathartic movie to watch. And catharsis doesn't necessarily mean that everything gets wrapped up in a bow. It just means that you're able to sort of release emotions, or at least commiserate with someone or something, or a piece of art, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
like,
if only for a while.
If only for a while,
that's
right?
temporary too.
The idea that if somebody can write those characters and write those feelings, and then beyond that, an actor was able to read those words and portray emotion that you feel like you yourself relate to, I mean, that's religion to me, you know? Sure. I mean, truly, like, I think that that's an incredible thing that human beings have devised. We came from, like, throwing poop against the wall, you know, in the jungles and caves, and then here we are making the master. Like, it's kind of insane, you know?
It's pretty impressive.
It's really impressive.
We went from Freddie Quell to Lancaster Dodd.
We went from Freddie Quell to Lancaster Dodd. Like,
it took a few billion years.
I want, like, that evolutionary line of man, right? Where it's like Freddie Quell all hunched over, and then
holding
like the ape,
liver.
and then the ape gets bigger until it's like Lancaster Dodd on the other side, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. How about the perfect casting of Jesse Plemons as the son, Val. He looks so much like him, so much so that it's commented on at least twice in the movie when people meet him. Yeah, this is my son, Val. Oh, I see it.
Yeah.
They do. I see it.
They do. They do look a lot alike.
He really did. I'd forgotten that he was in the movie.
Yeah. I forgot that Rami Malek.
Yeah, that's right. This is the second thing I remember seeing him in. He did such a good job in The Pacific. I don't know if you saw that, but it was
I did not.
That was the first time I noticed him. It was a kind of like Band of Brothers. It was an HBO, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg produced miniseries about World War II.
Yeah.
But this time, obviously, in the Pacific Theater.
Right.
And he played he just plays whatever ethnicity apparently Hollywood needs him to play. In this movie, he was a Cajun, or in the Pacific, he played a Cajun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Creole.
I believe he's...
Not Creole. No, Creole's something different.
Creole's different. He's just, I think they just call him Cajun.
He's just like, you put a pepper in the pot. Whatever.
No, actually, he's a pretty depraved guy in this one. But yeah, he blew me away in that. I thought he was fantastic. And I didn't see him for a good long while until The Master. And I remembered him, and then it wasn't until, I think, Mr. Robot.
So he does some brilliant acting, although his part is, he's a supporting actor, but he does some brilliant acting too. That scene, especially where at the dinner table, and it's himself and his wife, who's Dodd's daughter, Dodd, and then Amy Adams, and you see he's about to basically tattle on Freddie, right? And to say, like, I think this guy's no good, like, I think this just guy, and you see this kind of like self-satisfied kind of smile come across his face, and then he kind of like with the anticipation of what he's about to say, and like, and I kind of love that. And then he kind of stuffs it down, and then he takes on a more serious face. And because who hasn't felt that satisfaction of like tattling on somebody that you don't, or trying to turn people against somebody that you don't like,
Yeah.
And I think that was a cool little thing that he did there,
Yeah, he was great in that movie. What about, let's talk, I never understood this. Let's talk about this for a moment. His wife, which was Lancaster's daughter.
Yes.
She clearly was like feeling up Freddie. Freddie never expressed any interest in her romantically or sexually.
Right.
She did towards him, and then she just turns it around at the dinner table and says that I think Freddie's in love with me.
Because here's the deal, is I think she felt snubbed by him.
Sure.
So I think that I think in order to sort of like either make herself feel better or to kind of absolve herself of any guilt that she may have felt or whatever, I think that's kind of like a, I don't know, common thing. I feel like, people get snubbed and they're like, I don't know, he's in love with me.
I just felt like that was going to go somewhere.
No, but it didn't. It went nowhere.
It didn't. Okay. It just gave her a little, maybe it was just there for motivation for the dinner table scene.
Yeah, perhaps so.
Are we done? I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we did it.
So you feel good?
Yeah, do you feel good?
I do.
Do you feel like we covered all the big stuff?
I think we covered it all.
Okay.
Becky,
cool.
This was fun.
It was really fun. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Thank you for coming.
I hope that I did well, even though I don't really know a lot about film.
No, you did great.
Okay.
You did great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. I hope you keep in my Merkin jokes, though. Those were key.
Those are going to stay. And that does it for another episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. Your kind DMs and words of encouragement mean an awful lot to me, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that. Please leave us a review wherever you get your podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss a single episode. Filmography Club is produced in Nashville, Tennessee by the ever-diligent folks at We Own This Town, a podcast network recently voted Best Podcast Network by the good citizens of Nashville, though my first episode was still in the edit when that distinction was granted, so I can claim no credit for that. Be sure to check out the other We Own This Town podcasts. I'd like to thank my guest, Miss Becky Delius, Michael Eads, Will Fox, and Ross Warner. I'm Jason Caviness. Thanks for listening.
I graduated and I was here in Nashville and I was looking for a job, and it was like at that point where you're like, I have to find a real job because I am poor and I don't want to be poor anymore. And so I was kind of like, back in those days in the mid-aughts, I was driving around, you know, hoping to put my resume into places. And I passed, so the Scientology Celebrity Center, which is now on 8th Avenue, used to be over on Music Row. And I lived in an apartment very close to Music Row. So they had this huge sign out front that was like, receptionist needed or hiring receptionists. I'm like, perfect, I can do that. And at that time, I really didn't know anything about Scientology. I didn't know, you know, the whole reputation. Like, I'd heard of them, but I didn't really like know that much about it. So I go in, hey, I'm here to apply for the receptionist position. Oh, that's perfect. I did the whole personality test. I'm there for like 3 hours. I take a tour of the building. I got to see the, you know, every Scientology center has L. Ron Hubbard's office for him so that when he returns, he can just go straight back to business, right? So I do the whole thing. I'm at this point like, okay, cool. So am I hired, or like, what's the deal? What's the wage? And they're like, oh, no, we're all volunteers here. You know, this is a volunteer. And I was just
After
like,
hours
y'all
and
motherfuckers. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, skirt, skirt. And I just like left. And they called me for like weeks afterwards. And I had my phone had entered as like Scientologist exclamation point to be like, do not answer this phone. Like, I'm going to answer Sally Mae calling me before I'm going to answer this call, you know? And so it's just like, do not. And they would call me like, oh, hey, you know, this is Rob from the Scientology Center. You know, I just wanted to like say, you know, we had a really great meeting with you. We'd love it if you could come back in and get some more information. I'm just like, no, you got to pay me. 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 You got to pay